Glacier National Park is my favorite park, and my favorite part of Glacier is Many Glacier, because it's where most of my favorite trails are. But before I show them to you, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the area. Many Glacier is on the northeast side of the park, near the small village of Babb. And since the end of COVID, Many Glacier has become so crowded that you need a vehicle reservation just to get in to see it, at least during the busy season between 6 a.m. and 3 p.m. If you plan ahead, are lucky, and wealthy enough to stay in the historic Many Glacier Hotel, or the more affordable Swift Current Motor Inn, or even the campground, then of course you are allowed in for that day and for the next day. The rest of us will have to go to recreation.gov months in advance to buy a vehicle reservation that's good for just one day. They also release a few vehicle reservations the day before at recreation.gov, but they go very quickly. You can also book a boat tour or any other kind of tour to get into Many Glacier. It's a complicated process with lots of details, so I made a video that walks you through the whole process. Or of course you can just go to the park's website and hopefully figure it out. But for me, the best option is to get here early, before 6 a.m. Though I wouldn't start hiking that early, because bears tend to drink in the lakes in the morning. There are short and long trails here, and easy ones and hard ones. And one gives you a chance to step on a glacier, and it's my favorite. This is the Many Glacier Road, and this is the map they give you at the entrance. It shows the trails in the area, but there's a better one that you can download from the park's website. It has trailheads and shows the distance for trail segments, and the elevation gain for each trail is listed at the top. I highly recommend downloading this map. As you can see, there are many trailheads in the area. Each has multiple destinations. This one, Bullhead Lake, is on my best list. It's an easy but beautiful stroll through the Swift Current Valley. Iceberg Lake is a little harder, let's call it moderate. It leads to a spectacular cirque that often has icebergs. And from the same trailhead you can go to the much more difficult but spectacular view on the other side of the Ptarmigan Tunnel. There are shorter trails off the Many Glacier Road. And then there's my favorite trail, the moderately difficult Grinnell Glacier Trail. It has many amazing views that you have to see in person to believe. And it ends at a glacier. If you're not a fan of elevation gain, or it's just too hot on the day of your reservation, the Grinnell Lake Trail is a good option. It's in trees, and it ends at a really pretty lake. Also, there are some unmarked routes to the top of the surrounding mountains. And if some in your group aren't into hiking, you can let a horse do the work, all the way to Cracker Lake. I'm a flatlander, and on my first day in the park, I plan to do an easier, flattish trail to help me get used to the 4,800-foot altitude. The Bullhead Lake Trail, or a portion of the 8-mile round trip, is usually my first choice when staying on the east side of the park. When you're this close to the Continental Divide, you assume that the best hikes involve a lot of going up and down. Well, the Bullhead Lake Trail proves that this is not necessarily the case. This is also one of my favorite trails. The trailhead is near the west end of the Swift Current Motor Inn parking lot. Like many of the other park's trailheads, you can take it to one of several amazing destinations, depending on how far you want to go. This one goes all the way up the Swift Current Pass, where it connects to the Highline Trail, which of course is a part of the Continental Divide Trail. So you can go from here to Logan Pass, Canada, or even Mexico. But Bullhead Lake is just a 7.2-mile round trip. And again, it's relatively flat with only a few hundred feet of up and down, again depending on who you want to believe. The trail passes a chain of lakes. The nearby first lake is full of moose nearly every evening. The second has a colorful small waterfall. And the final one, Bullhead Lake, is in a beautiful terminal valley. The first is Fisher Cap Lake. That's the one with the moose. It's accessed via an unmarked spur trail that's just about a quarter mile from the parking lot. And this spur trail is easy to miss, and I've missed it many times. But this is the best place in the park to see moose. They feed in the water nearly every evening, and they do draw a crowd. I tend to make the photo op at this lake its own activity. I don't really come here when I'm going all the way to Bullhead Lake, but I'll talk more about that in a second. During the day, the moose are often in the nearby woods, so keep alert and actively listen because moose, as well as bears, feed during the day. So don't wear earbuds. And if you look closely, somewhere back there, there's a moose. Of course, it's easier for them to use the trail, so guess what? They do. The woods are pretty thick until you reach the west end of Fisher Cap Lake. And then the views get even better. One of the great things about Glacier is all the color. This red rock looks great under that blue sky. You reach the second lake about 1.5 miles from the trailhead. This one is Red Rock Lake. You may also hear the sound of rushing water, because about 0.3 miles later, there's another spur trail, and this one leads to Red Rock Falls. This cascade is a nice little place to scramble around, and kids love it. It's another 1.8 miles to Bullhead Lake and the terminal valley that surrounds it. And the geology, well, it's amazing. Just look at the folds in that cliff. And I've seen mountain goats on there, and up this ridge I've even seen grizzly. Luckily they were heading up and not down to the valley. This trail feels flat, and the 420-foot rise is very gradual. So it's really more like a stroll. It's only about 4 miles out, so it takes less than 1.5 hours to get here. And there's even a flat rock that makes a great bench to help you take it all in. This trail is on my must-do list. So on your first day in the park, especially if you're staying in Many Glacier, consider doing this trail, perhaps all the way to Bullhead Lake. By the way, the short stroll to see the moose in Fisher Cap Lake is a great way to spend just an hour or so at the end of the day, as long as you're back before the sun gets too low. Another trailhead that leads to a few interesting places is located on the north edge of the Swift Current parking lot. This one goes to Ptarmigan Falls, which is a 5-mile round trip, Iceberg Lake, which is about 9.4 miles up and back. Ptarmigan Tunnel is 10.4 miles away and has about 1,900 feet of going up. And from here you can also hike all the way up to the Canadian border, past Elizabeth Lake, through the Belly River to Canada. This is on the same ridge as Alton Peak, and it is frequently closed by bear activity. So if this trail is open today, well, it may not be tomorrow. If it's open, you have to do it. You may have to schedule around an availability of this hike. Only about a dozen cars can fit in the nearby parking area, so you may have to park at the Motor Inn and add a couple of blocks to your hike. The trail starts with a short climb above most of the trees, so there's nice views for the first 1.5 miles. Then you enter the trees. This, by the way, that's Bear Scat, and he's likely to be still around. On one of my hikes to Iceberg Lake, there was a bear on the trail. Here's an excerpt from that video. Why were they heading this way so rapidly? Some were nervously smiling, but nobody would stop their retreat to tell me. Soon I joined the retreat. Eventually, I did learn that a mama bear and 2 cubs were also using the trail. One hiker took these pictures and some video with a little point-and-shoot camera. Usually, bears will try to avoid humans. These blocked the trail and headed towards them. They got quite close. This is potentially a very dangerous situation. They were very lucky. The mama was only interested in teaching her kids how to find and eat berries. I and others had bear spray, but none of us wanted to have to use it. After several minutes of backtracking, we saw another group coming. The lady in orange is a trail tour guide, leading a group from the Boston area. We all felt that she knew best how to handle the situation. Then someone came up and said he saw the bears leave the trail and go up the hill. So we decided we could continue, but we did so as one large group. There is safety in numbers. Secretly, I'm sure all of us were checking out the others in the group, trying to determine who was the slowest, while at the same time hoping that an old joke wouldn't come true. 15 minutes later, in a clearing, one hiker showed us her photos of the bear. She was quite close to it. I've seen what happens when a bear attacks, on this very trail, and it's not pretty. The victim I saw in 1994 struggled down the trail, covered in blood. This witness explains what he saw.
I saw him. He has a deep laceration on the top of his head, one across the chest, one on the back.
It would have taken the victim 3 or 4 hours to get to the nearest hospital by car, and by then it might be too late. So a helicopter was called. In the next week, He had to endure 4 operations, but he did survive. Youthful enthusiasm can be nothing more than naivete. This time, we were lucky, but the danger was real, and the trail was again closed the next day. So the bear danger is real, and you need to learn basic bear safety and actually use it. The Ptarmigan Falls aren't really that much to look at, but there's a clearing near them, and it's a nice place to rest and maybe have a snack. And not long after you cross the bridge, there's a junction for the Ptarmigan Tunnel Trail. And I'll talk about this trail after I finish talking about the Iceberg Lake Trail. From the junction, it's about 2.1 miles to the lake. A mile from the bridge, you're out of the trees again, and the view of the valley and the Continental Divide is awfully nice. The trail gains a total of 1,250 feet, and except for the first climb above the trees, it does so gradually. This trail feels more like a stroll than a workout. Well, this is Iceberg Lake. It's in a nice cirque with a 3,000-foot cliff face. This was shot in September and the lake was free of ice. It'll look differently every time you hike here. This is another one of those hikes it's either on my must-do list or on my second tier, because generally it's a pretty good one. But now I'm going to talk about a much tougher hike up to the Ptarmigan Tunnel. It starts out just like the other ones did, climb up the little hill and go to Ptarmigan Falls, and the junction is just past the falls after you cross that little bridge. It starts with a half-mile slog up 400 feet through the trees and huckleberries, which of course is a favorite bear, so make noise. Then the trail climbs more gradually until a clearing with a lake. And by the way, see that little hole? Apparently a bear dug that. From the lake, there's also an intimidating view of the switchbacks up to the tunnel. The trail goes up another 500 feet in about 2/3 of a mile. Because of the weather, well, my view wasn't that great. Well, here's what it looks like on a nicer day. This is the door to the 250-foot tunnel. This is the impressive view on the other side. Because of the weather, I brought my cheap camera on this hike, and boy, I wish I didn't. Because the weather made this hike one of my most memorable. By the way, that's Elizabeth Lake below, where there's a backcountry campground. The trail continues past the lake all the way to Canada. I was really glad that I was prepared for any type of weather, because you got to remember that there's no cell coverage up here. And the weather up here, well, it can change in minutes. And that's what happened. But before it did, I took one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken in the park. This one's on my wall. But a minute later, the view was gone. A cold front brought fog to this side. On the other side of the tunnel, the clouds were really impressive. And then it started to sleet, making the 5+ mile hike down to my Swift Current cabin. It was interesting and one of my favorite hikes that I've ever done. What a great day. The Ptarmigan Tunnel hike is 10.7 miles with 2,300 feet of up. It's hard, and you'll need to be in great shape to do it. But the reward is a great experience. Just a bit east of the turn to the Many Glacier Hotel, there's a short trail with a view of the valley. It's called the Abercrombie Falls Trail. It's only 1.7 miles round trip, and it gains just 625 to 700 feet, depending on who you believe. And all of it is in the last half mile or so that's a bit of a workout. I've only done this once, and I think it was in 1999 or so I don't really have any good footage. And I remember that the view of the surrounding valley was pretty interesting. And as usual, a couple of other trails do connect here. And one of the kids who worked in the Swift Current Motor Inn told me about a way to get to the top of Alton Peak and its amazing view. It's a bit of a scramble, and you kind of have to find your way up, but this is the general route. And keep in mind again that this is on the ridge where bears love to congregate, so sometimes the entire ridge is closed to hikers. There's also a super secret way to climb Mount Grinnell. I've talked to someone who's done it, and he said the views from the hotel are incredible. I wish I had pictures to show you, but, well, I just don't. And on the way to the top of Mount Grinnell, there's also an old mine. There's also a way to bushwhack your way up to the peak over the back of the Many Glacier Hotel. The only way I know how to do these peaks is with a guide or with one of the kids who work in the park. They have lots of time off, and many of them spend their time doing amazing hikes like these. Now I'm going to talk about my favorite trailhead, which is also the most crowded. It's located on the road between the Many Glacier Hotel and the Swift Current Motor Inn. You can go to 4 to 5 places from here, and as you can see, there isn't much parking, so it fills up quickly. And if you have to walk here from the hotel or from the motor inn, you can add some distance to your day. There are trails here for every fitness level. The first few hundred yards or so is even wheelchair accessible. From here you can hike the Swift Current Nature Trail, the Grinnell Lake Trail, which includes Hidden Falls, and you can go on to Ptarmigan Pass. But you can also do my favorite hike in the park, the Grinnell Glacier Trail. The Swift Current Lake Nature Trail is a 2.7-mile loop around the lake. If parking's an issue, you can start this one at the Many Glacier Hotel. Just follow the shoreline until you see the trail, which is just a few feet from the water. But it's never a good idea to hike at night in bear country. If you like flat trails, from here you can take the 6.8-mile round trip to Grinnell Lake. If that's too far for you, and you still want to see Grinnell Lake, you can buy a ticket for a boat tour. Then only about 2 miles of walking is involved. And you can still take the short spur trail to Hidden Falls. If you'd like to gain some altitude, after the lake it's just a few more miles up to Ptarmigan Pass. But this view comes with a price. There's a 1,750-foot elevation gain. When you're in the mood for a hike that doesn't have a lot of climbing, the Grinnell Lake Trail is a good choice. For the first 2 miles or so, this is also the trail to Grinnell Glacier. From the trailhead, it's just under 3.5 miles to the lake. And there is little elevation gain, so it's more of a walk than a hike. If you take a boat tour from the hotel, well, then you'll only cover about 2 miles on foot. But we're at the trailhead, and the trail is mostly in trees. And by now you know what that means. Make noise. The first bit of the trail is paved to accommodate wheelchairs. Soon after the pavement stops, you'll cross a bridge and head towards the shore of Swift Current Lake. Somewhere near this part of the lake, there's a beaver dam. The boat drivers always point it out, but frankly, I've never seen it. The trail winds around the lake to the opposite boat dock. There's a 0.2-mile strip of land between the Swift Current boat dock and the dock on Lake Josephine. This little strip has a bit of upslope, but it's really the only climb on the way to Grinnell Lake. This is Lake Josephine. It's one of my favorite photo ops in the park, especially when the boat is at the dock. In the morning, Mount Gould and the lake is sunlit, and it's very pretty. The trail continues down the right side of the lake, with a great view of Mount Gould. There are fewer trees, so it's more open, and the sun, well, it might beat down on you. You'll see plenty of berries in this section, and remember that where there's berries, there will also be bears.
Hey, bear.
I've done this trail over 20 times, and I've never seen a bear on it. But I do follow bear safety procedures. I make noise. One day on the return leg from Grinnell Glacier, some fellow hikers asked me if I knew that I had just walked right under a bear.
Hey, bear.
And I said no, I had no idea. Apparently because
Hey,
I
bear.
was making noise, and I did not surprise the bear, well, it left me alone. I could have been lucky, or maybe it's because I knew the rules. When you're a bit past halfway to the end of the lake, there's a fork in the trail. We want to go left to Grinnell Lake. The right trail heads up to Grinnell Glacier, which I'm going to show you next. From the great photo op, it's about 1.3 miles to the end of Lake Josephine. This is where the boat tour stops, and a couple of trails connect here. You can even walk back to the hotel on this side of the lake. But no matter where you're going, double-check the signs. Once I was a bit cocky and I didn't do this.
It's pretty easy.
And, well, I took the wrong trail and ended up adding a few miles to my hike that day.
So you need to look at it.
But anyway, when you get on the correct trail, it's less than a tree-lined mile to another luxurious pit toilet, and the short spur trail to Hidden Falls, and another pretty good photo op. From here, it's another short walk through the trees till you cross a bridge over a creek, and then it's just a bit further to the lake. It's quite a nice view, and the colors, well, they're really nice. The waterfall at the far end of the valley is meltwater from Grinnell Glacier, and I'll take you there in a bit. This group of hikers on the far slope, they're heading up there. And if you're at the lake and you're feeling pretty good and maybe you want to hike a little bit more, well, based on the park's map, it's about 2.8 miles further down the trail, with another 500 feet of up, to Morning Eagle Falls. And if you're still feeling good, then you can go even further and gain another 1,250 feet up to Ptarmigan Pass. Now that's a full day. By the way, I got the Ptarmigan Pass from the Sun Road, which is a bit easier. When heading back, remember that you don't have to go the same way that you came. I always have, but you don't have to. If you're staying at the Many Glacier Hotel, well, there is a trail that goes along the back side of the lake. There's also a parallel horse trail, which you might want to avoid because of their droppings. So if I could just sum up the Grinnell Lake Trail, it's a moderate hike, mostly through the trees, and it's not too hard because it's almost entirely flat. So if you're in need of an easier hiking day, this trail's a pretty good choice. Okay, now I'm going to talk about my favorite trail. I've done it many times. The Grinnell Glacier Trail. You can head up here from this same trailhead to make it a 10.6 mile hike that goes up 1,600 feet. And that's if you're just going up to the overlook. If you want to go down to the foot of the glacier, you'll have to add about a mile or so. And there's some up and down involved there too. But you can save yourself about 3 miles of walking by booking a seat in advance on the boat. Tickets must be bought at least a day in advance, and it is often sold out. But I think it's worth it. I tend to take this hike as early as possible in the morning. And on this August morning, there was frost on the dock. This group was led by a ranger, so I followed her to make sure I'd get on the right trail. From the dock, the trail heads back to the ridge I showed earlier. At the junction, follow the sign to the Glacier Trail. After a short jog, it goes up rather quickly, providing a nice view of the bridge we just crossed. And yes, I did my best to avoid commenting on that jacket. From here, the trail is pretty straight and mostly exposed, but there are a few groves of trees as you constantly climb. I suppose I should have mentioned this before, but there are regular boat tours, but once a day there's a boat specifically for the ranger-led hike, and that's what I took this time. It has a quicker ride across the lake, and the ranger frequently stops to allow the group to rest as she provides info that is usually kind of interesting. This little talk was on geology. Notice the bending rock and the unique color? She explains how this formed. As the trail rises, the view keeps getting better. There's a few viewpoints with amazing views of Grinnell Lake. Now, lighting and weather has a great deal to do with the quality of the photos you get from this spot, but on this day it was pretty good. I'm going to let a few of these beautiful shots play on by as I talk a bit about the weather. When hiking in Glacier, just about any kind of weather is possible, regardless of how the day started. An hour after leaving the frost on the deck, I had my jacket off and the sun was, well, almost too much. And on the east side of the park, it can be quite windy. The air generally comes from the west and it hits the divide and then it just pours down the other side. I've been on this trail when the wind was blowing well over 20 miles an hour and it gets a little blustery. And often it's a cold wind too. Of course, it's colder as you go up, and it makes sense that it's cold near the glacier too. So dressing in layers is a good idea when hiking in Glacier. It can also rain unexpectedly. So I'm almost always wearing Gore-Tex hiking shoes or boots. And I always bring one of those extremely portable little ponchos that cost a few dollars. That is, of course, unless I'm wearing Gore-Tex pants and a jacket. Okay, now back to the trail. After an hour and a half or so, there's a bit of a bend, and then there's a little meadow. I think it's about here that the trail dips a bit, and you have to regain some of that hard-earned elevation. Then, less than a half a mile from the top, there's a clearing with benches and, well, even a pit toilet. It's a sheltered spot, so this is a good place to eat out of the wind. It's also a good place to rest, because the hardest and steepest part of the trail is yet to come. The last quarter mile or so is quite steep, but it has great views of the valley below. Finally, after 2 to 3 hours of hiking, you're at the Grinnell Glacier Overlook. It's about 2/3 of a mile to the glacier, and in places it's a bit of a scramble, but it's well worth it. Keep in mind that it may not be safe to walk on the glacier. When I first came here in the mid-90s, you could explore ice caves. And up to the early 2000s, rangers led groups out on the ice. Today, that's not really possible. The ice is too thin, and it's quite likely that it won't hold your weight. And you don't want to fall through a crevasse, because that water is very cold. Like I said, this is my favorite trail. And I hope you can see why. My 90-minute glacier travel guide includes an 11-minute segment just on this trail. And it's well worth a look. By the way, if you want to stay here, you might want to check out my Glacier, the Hikers National Park video. It has a detailed segment on lodging in Many Glacier. Well, those are my favorite trails in Many Glacier. And when you go to the park, I hope you get to do at least a couple of them. If this video helps you plan your trip, please consider subscribing to my channel. It's dedicated to helping you explore the West. And please click the like button and write a comment. I'd like to hear what you think.